Hello, and welcome once again to Lehto's Law. I'm Steve Lehto, attorney at law in the state of Michigan, where I've been practicing law for 24 years in the fields of consumer protection and lemon law. I frequently write about the topics as well in places like Jalopnik and Opposite Lock. I've written a few books and magazine articles as well. Today we're going to talk about how it is not illegal to sell a used car that is unsafe. Again, in most states, it is not illegal to simply sell a used car that is unsafe. I was inspired to talk about this today. I get a phone call yesterday, but I get this phone call about once a week at my office. Someone calls and says, Steve, I bought a used car. Driving along, something went wrong with it, took it to a dealership, they put it up on a hoist, they said, oh my gosh, this car is unsafe. It's often something like a broken frame or something of that nature. I've heard people say things about the brakes, also airbags, and so on. And people say, the car was unsafe. So I called the guy up I bought it from, some car dealer. I told him the car was unsafe, and he won't give me my money back. And people act surprised that a used car salesman won't just willingly give back the money on a car deal that wasn't good. And I have to explain to people, I say, well, why would you think they'd give you your money back? And they say, well, the car was unsafe. For some odd reason, people believe that there is a law out there that says you cannot sell an unsafe car to somebody. Now, you have to understand there's a couple things going on here. The federal government has mandated that big car companies can't sell brand new cars that are unsafe. That's why they've got crash standards and airbags and all kinds of things like that. So yes, if a brand new car was somehow unsafe, that would be a violation of federal law. What we're talking about right now is used cars. And so those used cars were at one point in time deemed safe by the federal government, assuming you're not buying a car from like 1895 or something. So you're buying a car 5-10 years old. When it was built, it was deemed safe. Somewhere along the line, something happened to it that now someone has told you it is unsafe. The phone call I got most recently, the person said they got this vehicle, they took it to a dealer for some reason afterwards, and somebody said the frame has been broken and repaired poorly, and this car is unsafe. Now, you have to understand also, there's no bright line as to where a car becomes safe or unsafe, okay? That's going to be a subjective thing to begin with. But second of all, there is no law in most states saying you cannot sell a used car that is unsafe. There just isn't. You might notice, for those of you who are watching this on YouTube, that directly behind me is a stack of blue books. Those blue books are law books, and those are the state laws in Michigan. I assure you there is no law in Michigan that simply says one cannot sell a used car that is unsafe. That law doesn't exist, okay? And in fact, the law goes the other direction. It's not good for you. And we'll explain to you this in a second. But there is no law in Michigan and in most states. Now, I understand that there are a few states out there that have vehicle inspection laws, okay? Now, many of these states just have vehicle inspection laws for things like emissions, which has nothing to do with safety. But there are a few states where you have to have your vehicle inspected for safety. And I've heard from people who say that if you sell a used car in a state that's got to pass a safety inspection, if it can't pass safety inspection, then there might be some impact on the law. But that's a vehicle inspection law. And again, that's in the minority of states. Of the 50 states in America, most of them have no such law that addresses anything to do with the quality of a vehicle being sold or the safety of a vehicle being sold. And in fact, the Uniform Commercial Code is the law of the land in all 50 states, even Louisiana for the most part. And again, I've got to qualify it because Louisiana has adopted some parts of the UCC and not others. But generally speaking, when you sell goods in America, it's governed by the UCC. And in Michigan, for an example, if you go to a used car dealer and he sells you a car, she sells you a car, the car is presumed to be merchantable unless they disclaim the warranty of merchantability. And they almost always do. 99.999%, and that's a repeating 999, percentage of all used cars sold in Michigan are sold as is. And I don't recall ever seeing a car dealer that willingly sold a car with the implied warranty of merchantability still intact. It's almost become an extinct concept. But the law books still show that you could theoretically buy a car with the implied warranty of merchantability on it. But if they've disclaimed the implied warranty of merchantability, which they're allowed to do, you buy the vehicle as is, which means with all faults, okay? So you buy the vehicle, you drive it off the lot, the engine explodes because the engine was no good. You can't return it because they sold you a vehicle with a bad engine. Likewise with the transmission, likewise with anything else, likewise with the frame or the brakes. And I've gotten phone calls where people say, Steve, I bought this car. I brought it to a mechanic who said there's something unsafe about it. I called the dealership up. They won't give me my money back. And I got news for you. They don't have to. They don't have to. Now, people are shocked by this, and I say, well, let me ask you a question. Why were you having it inspected after you purchased it? Why didn't you have it inspected before you purchased it? And people often say, well, I bought the car. The guy told me it was a nice car. I took it for a quick test drive, and then something went wrong with it later, so I took it to a mechanic, and that's when I discovered this thing. Michigan law, and in most states, where they've adopted the UCC, which, like I said, is 49 and a half states, you are presumed to have inspected something if you had the ability to inspect it but chose not to, okay? So you walk out to a car, I point at it, say, I'm selling you this car, do you want to buy it? You walk around and kick the tires, maybe take it for a test drive. You come back and you say, yes, I'll buy this car. Now, you could have taken that car to a dealership, put it up on a hoist. You could have climbed underneath it yourself and looked at the frame. You could have done all kinds of things that you chose not to do. And by not doing them, you waived your right to complain about it. And the law specifically says that if you had the opportunity to inspect and you chose not to, you waived your right to complain about things that you would have found had you inspected. Now, I've had people tell me, they say, Steve, the guy wouldn't let me inspect the vehicle. As if that's an excuse. And I always say, well, if he didn't let you inspect the vehicle, why didn't you just refuse to buy the car? And they say, well, and they haven't thought it through that carefully. And sadly, a lot of these phone calls I get in my office obviously are from people who haven't thought this stuff through very carefully. They went and dropped a lot of money in a car. They now found out the car's got a bad frame. They start calling attorneys they find on the internet. They call me, and I ask them the 3-4 basic questions, and they realize there's nothing they can do. And it's unfortunate because, I spoke to somebody the other day who's out $19,000 on a vehicle, which she said had a broken frame that had been repaired so poorly that the welds were starting to break or something of that nature. And the guy who looked at the car said, I wouldn't drive this car myself, but frankly, the fact you got it in here under its own power, you might be able to make it home, but I wouldn't bank on it. And the woman who called my office said, well, I've got kids. This is sad. I got to drive my kids around, and I need a vehicle for my kids. And I explained to her, I said, well, it's sad that a used car dealer would sell you a car like that. But number one, we don't even know if the used car dealer knew that it had these problems. And I'm not here to defend used car dealers. Frankly, they hate me so much that I wouldn't normally defend them anyways. But the point is, a lot of used car dealers out there buy and sell large quantities of used cars. And they don't often have the time to inspect them either. So I know I've spoken to guys who buy and sell used cars, and they say, we go to an auction, have the little book with us, whether blue book, black book, red book, or whatever, and I glanced at what this vehicle's worth based on the year, how it looked, and its mileage, and I bid on it, I won it, and I picked up like 10 cars that day, took them all back to my place, washed them, waxed them, put them out front, and sold them. And these guys will say they don't know anything about these cars. So that's another reason that you don't want to listen to anything they say about, oh, this is a great car, it runs nice. They probably don't know that either. And the laws protect them, however. The laws say that a used car seller can tell you almost anything as long as it's subjective. It's a great car, runs nice, taken good care of, blah, blah, blah. That's literally what that means, blah, blah, blah. It's meaningless. It has no meaning when they tell you things like that. And so when they are selling you the car and you're walking around it, they are never saying to you, by the way, this car is safe. Now, you might think, well, wait, why would the law really say that they can sell an unsafe car? It's not what the law says. The law says that if you buy a car with a warranty of merchantability on it, you can presume it's safe and reliable transportation. But when you buy a vehicle that's as is, it has no implied warranty of merchantability. Therefore, you do not have the warranty that says it's safe and reliable transportation. So if I can ever get anything across, I've been doing Lehto's Law for years now, the most important concept that you should wrap your head around and take to your grave is that if you buy a used car as is, that is from a dealership that's disclaimed the implied warranty of merchantability, or from an individual. Individual car sales are always as is. You have to assume that the vehicle you're buying is not safe transportation and it's not reliable transportation because nobody's promised you that they were. Okay? I don't want to get into a dissertation on what warranties are, but generally speaking, warranties are the objective statements or promises that the seller makes to you about the goods. So if I tell you it's a 1999 Ford Explorer, it better be a 99 and it better be a Ford Explorer. But if I say it's a 1999 Ford Explorer that runs great part is meaningless. The law says that that portion is meaningless. It's not enforceable. It can be a lie. There's nothing you can do about it. And I get people who call me all the time and say, Steve, this guy told me the car ran great. And I say, okay, Was he an individual or a dealer? He's an individual. Well, guess what? It was meaningless. And people go, well, the guy lied to me? You know, I got news for you. In this day and age, if it takes an attorney to tell you that a used car seller, whether a dealer or an individual, if it takes an attorney to tell you that a used car seller might be pulling your leg on something, you shouldn't be shopping for cars, okay? Somebody needs to go with you who understands this. So when you're buying a used car, you need to ask yourself, does it come with a warranty or is it being sold as is? If it's being sold as is, like I said, you're buying it with all faults, it could blow up tomorrow. Again, this is one of those topics that really bothers people and it upsets people to the point where they often argue with me about this. I've written whole articles about this. I've done shows about this. If you're buying something as is, you're buying it with all faults. You could literally be driving off the lot with it. The engine could explode, the transmission could scatter, the rear end could fall off, and the car could burst into flames. You could still be on the property of the car dealer, and that could happen, and you got nothing. You've got nothing to go on because you bought the vehicle as is. It might not seem fair, but it's the law. No one said the law is supposed to be fair. The laws are actually designed to just make commerce go more smoothly and be more predictable. So the fact is that when you buy these cars this way, you should know what that means, okay? Don't argue with me about it. If you don't like it, go talk to your legislator about it and see if you can get the laws changed, okay? But if, you know, I had this phone call yesterday and the buyer of the car is very upset because she has a car now with a broken frame that she thinks she can't drive. And she kept saying, but the car's unsafe, the car's unsafe. And I said, I finally ended the phone call by saying, I'm sorry, but there's nothing an attorney can do for you. Okay, I'm an attorney. I can work with the law. Okay, if you got a broken leg, you go to a doctor. If your dog gets hurt, you go to a vet. If a law has been broken, you call an attorney, right? Or if it's a criminal law, you call the police. But civil law, you call an attorney. I'm an attorney, and I'm here to tell you, in 24 years of practice, I've gotten these phone calls many, many times. There's nothing an attorney can do for you. Now, people who've listened to my show for a length of time have heard stories on my show where I've talked about this, and I've said there have been a few occasions where I've sued a car dealer successfully for selling my client a vehicle that was problematic, to say the least, but they were also sold as is. And people say, well, Steve, how did you get around that? How did you get around that? Because in both cases, well, I guess one of them, a famous story I told you about before, my client bought a Suburban that threw a rod a couple of days after she bought it. And the crankcase had been filled with heavyweight motor, you know, like a gear lube, like 90 weight oil or something, and that had been put in there to quiet a rod knock. And we went to court and we proved to a jury that the seller knew the car had a problem and they masked the problem. So if you can prove that the seller knew about the problem and didn't disclose the problem, then you might be able to get around it as is, because we're not arguing about the implied warranty merchantability there. We're actually talking about fraud, okay? Actual out and out fraud. So an as-is disclaimer won't shield a seller from fraud, but it'll shield them from claims regarding the merchantability of the goods. The other example I told you about not too long ago was the client of mine who bought a car that had been sawed in half, and somebody had taken the two halves, put the two halves together, and then sold that. And we made the claim that somebody in the chain of title should have disclosed that, by the way, this car has been sawed in half. And that was actually a weaker claim, I'll admit that, because you could argue and say, well, why didn't your client catch that? And he didn't, but you know, we went to court on that one. We wound up getting a decent outcome on it. But again, that's a situation where our argument was that it's not the fact that the vehicle was sold with no warranty merchantability, and we wanted the vehicle to be merchantable. There was something so substantial about the quality of the goods that should have been disclosed to my client that wasn't. So there are ways around an as-is disclaimer, but merely the fact that you bought a car that is unsafe doesn't mean that the sale was illegal. Again, I've had clients call my office, Steve, I bought a car. I found out later the airbags were missing. I say, okay, were you promised airbags? Do you have a document or something somewhere that says this car is complete with all airbags? And the callers always say, no, of course not. No one puts that in an ad for a car. And I said, well, if no one promised you airbags, then what makes you think you can go after them for breaking a promise? There's no promise there. And they said, well, I just assumed that the car should have airbags. And I said, well, you know, that's something you presumably could inspect. Somebody should be able to inspect it. I mean, how did you find out the car had no airbags? They go, a mechanic told me. So a lot of this goes back to one of my caveats, one of my commandments, one of my rules for living. If you're going to buy a used car, in fact, I say it extends to new cars, but if you're going to buy a used car, unless you yourself are a certified master, you should bring somebody with you who knows cars, presumably a certified master, or, and I'm referring to a certified master mechanic, by the way, or you should take the car to a mechanic and have the vehicle inspected by a mechanic. I'm talking about up on a hoist, okay? A mechanic who puts a vehicle up on a hoist is going to spot problems that you wouldn't notice unless you actually laid on your back at the dealership and climbed underneath the car yourself, and you were trained to know what you're looking at. And most people I know are not that well trained nor that inclined to do so. And famously, I've told you before, my last vehicle I bought was a used Ford Explorer. I love those vehicles. And I'm not a mechanic, but I know them very well. I climbed down underneath it on my back, and I remember having a long conversation with the seller's shoes because he was standing there looking through the engine compartment at me as I was inspecting the vehicle. And that's just something I do, and someone should do that for any vehicle you buy. And yet, across America today, thousands of used cars are being sold where a buyer is going to walk around the vehicle, take a look at the vehicle, and buy the vehicle, and pay absolutely no never mind with respect to, does this vehicle actually have everything it needs? Does it have a safe frame? Does it have all its airbags? Do its brakes work? And so on and so forth. And without doing those kind of inspections, they don't know. They buy the vehicle, they're stuck with it, and then they're going to be calling an attorney saying, what can I do now? My vehicle is unsafe. And an attorney's going to have to tell them, well, if you bought the vehicle as is, unless you can prove some sort of fraud, and fraud, by the way, is an extremely difficult thing to prove. The standards are quite high in all states. Unless you can prove some kind of fraud, you're going to be out of luck. So generally speaking, again, this is why we have to say this, it is not illegal to sell a used car that is unsafe. No one's guaranteeing you that the car is safe, that you're buying used. So it is not illegal to sell a used car that is unsafe. That's it for this week's Lehto's Law. Questions or comments, always contact me, lehtoslaw.com, LEHTOSLAW.com. I'm on Twitter at Steve Lehto, at STEVELEHTO. And of course, the show's on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and YouTube. Thanks for watching and listening. Bye-bye.